Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show, Colonial Revival. Do you know when it is? Do you know what it is? I'm going to talk about it today on the Build Show. Come join me. Okay guys, so we did one on neoclassical kind of because it's a little bit confusing when neoclassical happens and what that means, right? We're gonna do another one on Colonial Revival. Now, Colonial Revival is a period in time, all right? And I'll tell you when it is, but it references the colonial period, okay? So if you think about America, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? That begins a period of imperialism, okay? The Spanish, the French, the English, the Dutch, okay, are all conquering new territories and new lands, right? And so when we say the colonial period, we're talking about that early period of time. Now, the reason it's confusing is because we have that American Revolution, right? American Revolution. Then we become the United States. And so technically, we're not really a colony anymore. Although, when we fast forward, and generally when people talk about the Colonial Revival era, they're talking about this period of time, 1890 to 1940, when colonial styles, Georgian, Federal, Greek Revival styles, okay, were very popular and kind of configured and redone. So when we talk about Colonial Revival, we're really talking about Georgian, Federal, and Greek Revival styles, okay, that have been revived in the 1880s into the 1940s. So it happens during the Victorian period where you'll see Victorian colonial houses, okay, with leaded glasses and things like that. There's some colonial influences at Thistle Hill, right? That front door is a federal front door, and that kind of plays to that Colonial Revival. That house has been called Georgian Revival. I don't think it is. We've called it neoclassical, right? There's some Palladian aspects with the way those columns come out and everything else, right? There's that strong presence. We called that the neoclassical, but there's Colonial Revival elements there, okay? There's a lot of different details, and that's why it's so confusing, right? Because you go, well, wait a minute, that was a French room inside there, and that's arts and crafts inside there. That's not Colonial Revival. You're right, okay? Because what happened is during that, especially in that Victorian period, they borrowed from everything. And so you look at a house like McFarland, it has French influences, it's Queen Anne, it has all these different things going on because it's kind of part of that story. But that also makes it confusing for us today when we talk about Colonial Revival. What are we talking about? Because that's the Victorian style, right? But then you get into the 1920s, 1930s, and the 1940s when it's so popular, and you think about Levittown. Those are little, American capes, right? You think about Colonial Williamsburg, it really gets blown up in the 1940s. 1925, we're, 150 years old. We're looking back at American architecture. And so, the John Staub house where the tavern is, that is a Colonial Revival house done by John Staub. It's wonderful. Now, if you go inside there, you'll see things that are a collection of different periods. So what are those? The Cecil bedroom at Winter Tour, right? It has a Belection molding around the fireplace. There's no mantel shelf. So in that early period, if you figure that the Georgian period, 1740 to 1780, let's say, there are some pre-Georgian things that are happening there that the way they get interpreted, the way they get made in America, we call that colonial. So a Colonial Revival house that we build today can have a Georgian mantle, it can have a Federal mantle. In fact, I'm working on one right now. Maybe you'll see it in one of my Wednesday videos where we're gonna have a collection of different details from that period. All of those things are borrowing and looking back to the past. If you guys haven't been to Colonial Williamsburg, that is a treasure trove of fun things to look at. High style, simple, both are inspiring, both are fun. All of those things are things that we can look at and want to copy today. So what do you look for today if you're trying to do a Colonial Revival house? Oftentimes it'll get called traditional today, and people may not use the words Georgian and Federal or Greek Revival properly. So if you watch my Wednesday videos on YouTube or my Instagram, you'll notice that some of the things I continue to fix are columns, okay? Columns and porches, which are so messed up today, or window sizes. And so looking to the past, trying to get some of those details right, it's really important to just copy the past, okay? Don't go, oh yeah, we can do a porch like that. Actually go and measure it and look at it and figure out how big the entablature is, how big the cornice is, how big those moldings are. Mantles are another thing. door casings. It's hard to find good moldings today, right? I've designed the Kukin and Windsor lines. I did that so that we could have good moldings, right? Because there aren't good moldings at certainly the big box stores, but even good lumber yards don't oftentimes have good moldings. And so the more that you can execute properly, the more the details that you can nail, right, and get right, the better your story is going to be, the better your narrative, better your Colonial Revival house is going to be. If you go to a house from that period, you'll oftentimes notice things like rim locks, okay? Rim locks are something that is a very simple lock to install, very simple to get today, not very expensive, but adds huge visual value and visual punch to your job, okay? 4-panel doors and 6-panel doors tend to be the most popular doors in that time. But if you use an H hinge or an H&L hinge, you're kind of raising the bar and kind of working in and getting some of those details right. I talked about door casings and punctuating openings. Really no door casing, less than 4 inches should be in some of these houses that you're trying to build. And so finding a 4 and a 5-inch door casing can be hard. So you're going to be looking for details like that. Shutters, okay? All shutters were working shutters pre-1930, right? We didn't have air conditioning. They were used for, blocking out the sun or letting the air in. In fact, the National Association of Sash, Door, and Blinds, okay, were the big 3 items that millwork companies were about: sashes, doors, and blinds. And so talking to a company like, Timberlane or something that actually knows how to help you get the hardware right so that your shutters will actually close over your window. Crafts and Blog, Steve down in Florida, does a great job of showing all the different fails, okay, with the shutters and what's going on there, and it's something we mess up today. So if you can start getting some of these details right, if you can get the porches right, the balusters right, the sizing right, shutters, hardware, right, all of these different elements, each one is a 1%, 2%, 3% thing, but you do 10 of them and your house is 20, 30, 40% better. The don'ts on this thing, okay, don't use columns that are just straight tubes, okay? Your columns need entasis, and if you watch some of my videos, you know that it's the shaping of the column and how it works. Getting architecturally correct columns is a huge deal. Don't buy a tube, okay? Understanding the proportions, and sometimes your columns are too skinny, they're too tall, you're not using the correct entablature over top of it. Those things really matter. Dormers, okay? Dormers are a big thing. I've done a number of videos on dormers, but getting the dormers right, there is a thing called a graduated fenestration, which means that the bottom windows are bigger than the second story windows and the dormers on top are smaller, okay? Because there is a hierarchy, there's a balancing, there's a proportion that takes place there that makes those houses feel great. And if you've got these gargantuan dormers up on top of your house, one, there isn't a strong historic precedent for it, but it looks bad, right? So getting those proportions right, getting those details right really does matter. Okay guys, Colonial Revival, right? Do you understand it? Now we're really talking about this period, but looking back at the past, and the colonial gets a little confusing because we weren't a colony during that period, but all of this thing is looking to the past, is being inspired from the past, and if you want to do it right, you got to study those details and get the details right. I'm Brent Hull, thanks for watching.